In this video, we're going to talk about how Photoshop keyboard shortcuts actually have some logic behind them. They are not just a random collection of things you have to hold down to get to various features. So let's take a look. First off, the Shift key in Photoshop. Obviously, if you hold it down and you're typing text, you get capital letters. But the other thing that happens when you use the Shift key in Photoshop is you might constrain things. And that means, let's say you're scaling something to make it larger or smaller. You won't be able to squish it only horizontally or only vertically. By holding down the Shift key, you will scale it proportionately, where you don't do it more in one direction than the other. Or when you're moving something with Photoshop's Move tool, you'll only be able to move it in a 45-degree angle. So horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. So that's what I mean by constraining. As far as adding goes, that means if you have a selection active and you make a new selection, usually that new selection would replace your old selection. But if you hold down Shift, you're going to combine two selections into one. Also, here I have listed as amplifying a change. And what that means is if you're making certain changes, like let's say with certain sliders, if you hold on the Shift key, you'll make a larger change. That's not with every single choice, but if there is a choice to make a larger change when you're moving a slider, holding down Shift will do it. Or when you're using certain filters, like the Render Clouds filter, for instance. If you hold down Shift, you might get a more vivid version. The Option key on a Macintosh, which is Alt in Windows. It has some very standard functions. The first one is it duplicates things. If you're using your Move tool to drag something across your screen, when you hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, you're going to move a copy of it. Or in the Layers panel, if you have a layer mask or a layer style and you drag it between layers, usually it would just move it. But if you hold down Option or Alt, it's going to duplicate it as you move it. So it'll still remain on the original layer. Also, holding down the Option key, Alt in Windows, can reveal many alternative features. For instance, when you're in any adjustment, you'll find that the Cancel button changes to Reset when you hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows. Or when you're in certain adjustments, you can hold down the Option key and it'll give you a different view of your image. There's all sorts of areas. But if there is a hidden feature somewhere, usually you're going to have to hold down the Option key or Alt to get to it. Although on occasion, there's more than one hidden feature related to a particular area, so you might need to hold on different keys, but if there's only one special feature related to that, you're going to hold down Option or Alt to get to it. Also, when you're making a selection or you're drawing a shape, if you hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, you're going to start that shape from its center, gradiating out to the edge, instead of going from corner to corner. Finally, if you're using selections, if you hold down the Option key and you create a selection when the one is already existing on your screen, that second selection will subtract from the first. It will take away from it. Now, we talked about earlier, you could hold on Shift to add to a selection. Well, if you hold on both Shift and Option at the same time, when you make one selection, you're only going to end up with the area where that new selection overlaps one that was already on your screen. So you get the intersection of the two, only where the two overlap. The Command key on a Macintosh, which is the Control key on Windows, if you hold it down temporarily, it will give you the Move tool temporarily. So you can use that, move layers around as much as you want. Hold down the Command key, you can use it. Let go of it, you'll instantly be back in whatever key you used to be in. Then also holding down the Command key and pressing any letter on your keyboard will usually replace a menu command that would be found at the top of your screen. Then if you hold on the Command key and you click on things, like you click on the thumbnail for a layer, or the thumbnail for a channel, or the thumbnail for a layer mask, you're going to load that particular thing as a selection. And that's really useful. Return or Enter is going to accept whatever it is you're doing. Let's say you're typing in text into a particular field in some adjustment. When you press Return or Enter, it means accept that, finish it, finalize it, and then return what's known as focus to whatever the default is. For instance, if the default would be when you type numbers on your keyboard, it might change the opacity of the tool you're painting with. But that's only if nothing else has what's known as focus. And if you clicked on something on your screen, like where you could click and type in some setting, like let's say the name of a font, that has focus at the moment. And pressing return or enter would accept it, finish it, and return focus to the default, which would mean those number keys would suddenly work again to change the opacity of a layer. The escape key, which also can be replaced by holding down the command key and pressing period, just aborts things. If you're in the middle of an adjustment or you're scaling and rotating a layer and you decide you don't like it, just hit escape. It'll abort it. Same thing with a lot of other features in Photoshop. If you ever find something just isn't working, first thing I do is press escape to get out of whatever it thinks you're in and press return to accept whatever you're in, and then things will usually work fine again. Tab does two things. It either toggles the visibility of the panels in Photoshop, so like the right and the left panels, it might show you your layers and your tools. Press it again and it makes those show up again. Or it cycles between various text fields on your screen. So if you're in, let's say, an adjustment that has 3 different numbers you could type in relating to that adjustment. If you got the first number selected, you hit tab, it'll go to the second number. Hit tab, it'll go to the third. And therefore, you could enter all of the various fields relating to that adjustment by tabbing between them. Caps Lock does 2 things, one of which you already know, which is if you press it, you get capital letters when you type. But the second thing is it gives you a precise cursor, which means instead of seeing a round brush indicating how big of a brush you're painting with, you will get a crosshair that shows you only where the very center of your brush is. Now, the main other time you'll see that is if you have a brush that is so large that it's literally bigger than your screen. And therefore, it can't show you the edge of the brush, so it must show you the center. So even when you let go of Caps Lock, you might still see a crosshair. That's maybe because you're zoomed in on your picture, only looking at a small portion, and the brush you're using is so big, it's bigger than your screen. If that's the case, zoom out until you can see your full picture, and you can most likely see your cursor, that little round circle that indicates your brush. If it looks like a crosshair, look down at your keyboard, see if Caps Lock is turned on. A lot of people have reinstalled Photoshop, reset their preferences, and gone way out of their way to try to get rid of a crosshair, but they never looked at their Caps Lock key because that's what was causing it. The Control key on a Macintosh is the same as the right mouse button in Windows or on a Mac that has a 2-button mouse attached. And that will show you a contextual menu, a menu that has options that is related to whatever feature you're currently using. So if you're using text, you'll find only choices related to text. If you're making a selection, you'll find features related to selections. But you get to it by holding down the Control key on your keyboard and clicking the mouse. It's the same as having a right mouse button. The space bar in Photoshop. If you just press and hold it, you will have the hand tool, so you can scroll around your picture. If you add the key that's right next to the space bar, which is the Command key in a Mac, Control in Windows, you will then get the zoom tool, so you can zoom in or zoom out on your picture. The arrow keys do special things, and that is if you're in something like the Move tool or a Selection tool, using the arrow keys will nudge your selection or your layer 1 pixel at a time in any direction. And if you hold down Shift, I say here that does turbo, it means it will do it 10 times as much as usual. So then you can move it 10 pixels at a time when you use the arrow keys. The other thing it does is if you happen to have a text field selected where you can type in a number, you can use the up and down arrow keys to change the number that's in there. And if you hold on the Shift key, it'll change it by a larger increment. So it can be nice. And that is the logic of Photoshop keyboard commands. They're not just random. There is a little bit of logic behind them. It takes a little bit of time to get used to them. But once you do, then things make a lot more sense.